Okay, Jerome, thank you so much for being a guest with us today.
Hey, Jesse, it's a pleasure.
We're excited to have you, and I want the audience to have a good idea here. What first got you into the recruiting space?
So I actually got headhunted into recruitment, funnily enough.
Yeah.
If you look at my background, I used to be in hospitality for quite some years. I set up a restaurant with a good partner of mine, a fine dining restaurant. And after that, I realized that the long hours, not work, not being able to have my weekends to myself, I was looking for a change. And one day, a very good customer of ours rang me up out the blue, managed to scrape my number off the internet and said, "Hey,
Hmm.
Jerome, would you be interested in recruitment?" So at that place and time, I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I want to get out of this industry." So I
Yeah.
got welcomed into recruitment, got welcomed into the Curve group, and started at Novo. And that
Yeah.
was about 3.5 years ago.
Yeah. How ironic is that? Getting recruited into recruiting, right? I mean, it's
I
perfect.
know, I know.
You know
Got
exactly how the
headhunted.
process goes.
Exactly. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I was sitting outside on a fire escape, despising my job, and I got a call.
Yeah. Oh, it's perfect. It's perfect. What now I think it's good for people to know what keeps you in recruiting because that's what got you to go into it, right? But what makes you enjoy it? Why do you stay?
It's a good question. I think for me, I've always been around people. So the people is what kept me in recruitment and what's keeping me there. I mean, the communication, the listening, the ability to influence, coach, and help people ultimately through a troubling time, whether that's a candidate or even a client. And that comes on to essentially a challenge. I'm quite a competitive guy. So there's that challenge of either finding that unicorn who's either across the world or nearby to fulfill a particular vacancy that I'm working on, or to help a client with a need that they're unaware of, or to just change someone's life. Like my life was changed back in hospitality when I was looking to leave and got called out the blue. So I think that impact that I have on some people's lives is ultimately really rewarding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean it does. It really changes every aspect of their life, right? I mean, if you had a position where you're working every weekend, long hours, and now you get to actually enjoy your life, right? I mean, that's a huge shift. That's awesome.
100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
look, leading a team in hospitality was great, and being a general manager at a very well established business that's still going today in Leeds here in the UK
Yeah.
was great. I learned so many soft skills in hospitality, and I think that carried over really well into recruitment. Being able to pick up the phone, being able to interact with people, being able to problem solve, being able to think on at any given moment about what I should say, how to handle something. I think that came quite naturally
Yeah.
from the hospitality background that I have.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. And I'm so that the listeners have a good understanding here. Who's your typical client and your typical candidate?
Sure. So, typical client and candidate, well, I mean, it would vary. So, here at Novo, under the Curve Capital Group that I'm part of, we work specifically in executive recruitment. So, manager, director, team leader, and all the way up to C-suite. So, that's where we work. We don't do volume recruitment. We're a highly specialized business. So, we're typically looking at people who manage teams or who have relatively senior roles.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, perfect. And what industries? Do you typically focus on specific industries or is it pretty across the board?
No, so we are highly specialized in TIC. So an acronym for you is testing, inspection, and certification. I'll probably use it quite a bit in this podcast. So testing,
Yeah.
inspection, and certification, or the regulatory and compliance space, is quite a niche industry, needless to say. I started off when I first came in as a resourcer working in the environmental, food, and feed space. So looking at things like soil composition, looking at Legionella in water, for example, looking at food safety, food fraud, food traceability. So we deal with essentially a lot of third-party testing labs or
Hmm.
certification bodies.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, perfect. I wanted to make sure that our audience really had a good understanding there before we dive any deeper. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about, have you seen any major shifts or trends in the industries that you place in when it comes to candidates or clients that what they need to be aware of?
So in testing, inspection, certification, it's a bizarre, very niche, again, hidden industry that I think people aren't aware of that often, unless you're a manufacturer, designer, product developer. You obviously want to bring a product to market and make sure it's stable, it's safe for people to use, people to buy. I mean, we can think of a few different examples off the top of my head. I'm sure you remember the whole Ocean Gate situation, sending a
Yeah.
submersible down into the sea with
Yeah.
no third-party testing. That's a
Mhm.
good example of what happens sometimes if you don't get, if you're not audited, if you are testing the products,
Mhm.
the components, the materials, etc., etc. So I moved from food, water, and environmental tick into built environment. So I'm now head of that market that I built up from scratch over the last 2 years. So
Mhm.
I deal with anything around infrastructure, materials. Fire testing is a huge part of the work that I conduct at the moment. Obviously, in the UK, we've had some big, very topical news recently with Grenfell and La Canal previously. So two
Mhm.
high-rise buildings that went up in flames and caused a lot of news, and uh, so the regulatory side is super important. So for me, I think it's a hidden industry that people don't think of. So
Mhm.
creating visibility around it, and I think what clients need to be aware of is that hiring out of industry is super important, and it's something I'm seeing more and more of. You've got
Mhm.
people manufacturing, take, say, insulation or fire safety products. Who better
Mhm.
to understand those fire safety products than someone who's worked in that industry and can pivot into that testing body, that certification body, that lab, who can certify those products essentially. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting trend because
Mhm.
there are a lot of big players. Well, there are a few big players in tech,
Mhm.
and it can seem quite an incestuous market at times. I think some people go around a merry-go-round of going to the same old companies, for 5, 10 years, and they go to a competitor. So I think bringing in some fresh blood, some fresh perspective is something I'm seeing more and more.
Yeah.
Uh,
Interesting.
but yeah,
That's really interesting because it's more rare. I mean, for what I see in a lot of recruiting is, typically you want to keep somebody from one industry, keep them in the industry and place them in another position. But I'm sure that's a breath of fresh air for a lot of people to hear. It doesn't mean it's happening in every industry, but in tech, I'm happy
no,
that to see that that is, a kind of an uptick, right? I mean, not to
yeah.
have an awful play on words there, but an uptick in the trend, right? So I love seeing that. How is demand changing? Are there any skills or roles that are suddenly in high demand for candidates?
There's, I think, tech again being an interesting industry and slightly alienated from everyone. There's been a lot of private equity involvement recently. There's been a lot of private equity firms getting involved with tech because if you think about it, it's almost guaranteed revenue. If your customer service is on point, then
Hmm.
people are going to use you to certify their products, to become audited, to gain accreditation, for example.
Hmm.
Therefore, these manufacturers, these producers, these services, business solution businesses, they will need to come to a certification body or an external lab. So for PE firms, it's a guaranteed source of revenue and growth if they play their cards right. So for me, I've seen a lot of PE houses take uh, a big interest in tech, and there's been a lot
Yeah.
of PE firms investing quite heavily in them, and therefore a lot of the leaders that I speak to who are allied to that tech industry if they've got PE experience, they seem to be really well valued in a lot of these
Mm.
companies by the PE firm.
Right.
Um, but otherwise, I think another one would be from an operational standpoint within TIC, um, people with merger and acquisition with M&A experience
Hmm.
is very important. The
Yeah.
quickest way to grow, and I think there's a few very good examples in TIC of companies who've done it very well, is buy your competitors. It's a hell
Yeah.
of a lot more expensive to build your own lab from scratch with all the instrumentation, all the software, all the tools, all the systems and processes. It's a hell of a lot more expensive to do all that and build it up from scratch. So people are just buying, they're buying competitors. And in the news, for example, there's a recent big example. I know they've been teasing this idea for a couple of years now, or several years. There's
Hmm.
two big companies, Bureau Veritas and SGS. They were
Hmm.
in talks again recently about merging together. I mean, from a market share perspective, that would have been huge.
Hmm.
So people in operations who have a good understanding of integration and M&A, it's big. From a sales perspective, I think because you've got so many different service lines in a lot of these bigger companies, you need people to think strategically about
Yeah.
their sales. You need people who can think about cross selling. You need to think about people who can really grow their share of wallet. If you've got a company who's purely doing fire engineering and they're testing, I don't know, fire sprinklers, they might well be making insulation or cladding or building envelopes. So therefore, you've got to think about, well, you're using us for X product. Why not use us for this service and that service? So
Hmm.
really land and expand with your accounts. So from a sales perspective, people who think strategically
Hmm.
becoming more and more important, I believe.
Yeah.
Not just pure hunter, business development type people.
Right. Right. No, that's interesting because I mean, to kind of summarize that, it kind of sounds like M&A and strategic sales, right? Kind of having, depending on your background, right? Have being strategic if you're in sales and then having that merger and acquisition background. Um, That's really helpful for people to know because 2025 seems to be shifting a lot. There's always different trends going on, and so listeners always want to
Yes.
know, hey, what's going on? What are you seeing in the industries that you're placing in? Do you see any common mistakes that candidates make when interviewing with you or with your client?
Good question. Uh, I think common mistakes. I mean, look, everyone's different. So everyone has a chance to be authentic. And some people simply don't get on. You'll have culture differences, you'll have leadership styles. You've got companies who provide psychometric testing before they hire, some don't. So
Yeah.
there's so many variables at times. But I think the common mistake is not being authentic. I think some people really try to put on a face when they're at interview stage. Sometimes people get too bogged down in what is ultimately a very technical environment. But if you're the right character, if you've got the right attitude behind you, and your CV and your experience speaks for yourself, the development will come. The return
Mhm.
on investment from your future employee should fall back to you, and you'll be
Yeah.
trained. You'll gain different certificates, maybe different ISO standards if you need it. You'll gain an understanding of the business internally. So I think people who get bogged down in the technical aspect sometimes they shoot themselves in the foot trying to come across as maybe more uh, better than maybe on their CV or
Yeah.
try. Or, I think that sometimes it does occur.
Yeah. No, it's really good to keep in mind as well, right? Authenticity is a huge part and making sure that you're staying, I don't know, true to what you actually know and not trying to stretch yourself too thin so people can actually enjoy the conversation because it's human interaction. That's what a lot of the job hunting process is, right? So I think that's really interesting to know. I'm curious if let's say somebody that's listening today, they're hearing things that they just think, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is, I'm a potential client for Jerome, I'm a potential candidate. What's the best way to reach you?
Best way to reach me is if you're brave enough, pick up the phone because that's a lost art.
Mhm.
But otherwise, LinkedIn. Let's face it, any recruiter out there is pretty much living and breathing on LinkedIn. So you can
Yeah,
reach out to me on LinkedIn. There is only one Jerome Verity Thomas out there, so you can look me up. Otherwise, you can find our website at nova-talent.com. You can see all my wonderful colleagues and their markets of specialisms there. And you can reach out to us equally on our website and find us all on LinkedIn.
perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jerome. I appreciate you being a guest. Thank you for your expertise and we'd love to have you on again. So hopefully we can have you on again in the future and thank you for your time.
Yeah, sounds good, Jesse. Next time I'll be the first Brit, hopefully.
Yes. Perfect. Perfect.